The smell of warm hay and diesel clung to the air that morning, mixing with the earthy scent of freshly tilled soil. Out here, tucked between long stretches of fields and gravel backroads, nobody expected much excitement, especially not at McIntyre Farms, where old men and their sons built things the world didn't see anymore. Mason McIntyre, with his sun-worn hands and quiet grin, had never been one for drama. He just liked the simple life, fixing broken tractors, welding old iron into something useful, and keeping his word, which made what happened next all the more surreal. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, because what you're about to hear, you might not believe unless you grew up in a place like this. It started when Mason swung open the factory doors, ready to put in another long day. But instead of a usual piece, he found two men in cheap tactical gear standing there, dark sunglasses, fake badges clipped to their belts, barking orders like they were starring in some low-budget action movie. "This is a restricted area," one of them barked, chest puffed out. "Under HOA authority, we're shutting you down." Mason blinked, confused. "HOA? Out here?" His land stretched 15 acres past the county line. No neighbors close enough to throw a stone at, let alone some suburban association telling him what to do. But these guys weren't backing down. They flashed some made-up paperwork and started strutting around like they owned the place, snapping photos and scribbling notes. Mason rubbed his jaw, trying to stay calm. He wasn't a man to pick a fight, not unless someone gave him no choice. And looking at these fools, he had a feeling that choice was coming quicker than they realized. Mason's first instinct was to laugh. He actually let out a soft chuckle, one the men clearly didn't appreciate. "You boys sure you're in the right place?" he asked, voice low and even, the way a thunderstorm sounds just before it breaks. But the taller one squared his shoulders and shoved a laminated badge into Mason's face. "Homeowners Association Enforcement Division," he snapped. "You're in violation of multiple ordinances, noise complaints, unregistered construction, improper land usage. We can seize this property if necessary." Mason shook his head slowly, feeling that old familiar heat rise in his chest. His family had built this workshop by hand before most of these HOA suburbs even existed. They didn't owe a dime to anybody. But before he could say a word, the shorter guy, stocky, with a mean glint in his eye, stepped forward and jammed a finger against Mason's chest. "Cooperate, old man, or it's going to get ugly." Mason froze. He wasn't a fighter, but he'd seen enough life to know when a man was begging for a reaction. And right now, these boys were itching for it. His hands curled into fists at his sides, knuckles whitening. Then he caught himself, breathed deep through his nose. Don't give them what they want, he thought. Not yet. "Tell you what," Mason said, voice steady. "You wait right here. I'll get the paperwork to clear this up." He turned and headed back into the factory, ignoring the jeers the two hurled after him. Inside, hidden behind a row of battered tool lockers, Mason pulled out his old flip phone and made a single call. Not to the sheriff. Not yet. No, he called his son, Owen, the real owner of McIntyre Farms. The man whose name these fools should have known before stepping 1 foot onto that dirt. It didn't take long. Mason barely had time to lean against the battered workbench and steady his breathing before he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Owen's truck, all steel and anger, roared around the corner like a storm cloud rolling in. He killed the engine in one sharp twist and swung down from the cab, his boots hitting the dirt with a heavy thud. At 6'3" and built like the barns he'd helped raise, Owen didn't need to say a word to make a man think twice. The two fake enforcers turned at the noise, smug at first. Then their faces shifted, like prey catching a whiff of a predator they hadn't seen coming. Owen strode up slow, his jaw tight, eyes locked on Mason just long enough to ask without asking, "You good?" Mason gave the smallest nod. Owen turned to the man. "Mind telling me what you're doing on private property?" His voice was low, steady, dangerous. The tall one coughed and stepped forward, trying to reclaim whatever authority he thought he had. "We've received multiple complaints," he said, lifting the phony badge again. "HOA enforcement. You're in violation." Owen cut him off with a laugh. "Short, sharp, cold. You idiots realize this isn't even part of an HOA? We're county land. Has been for 60 years. And even if it wasn't, you got no authority here. For a second, The men hesitated. But the stocky one, stubborn as a kicked mule, sneered and reached for something inside his vest. A ticket book, or maybe worse. Mason tensed, his instinct screaming. Owen didn't move. He just smiled. That slow, dangerous smile Mason hadn't seen since the last time some out-of-town contractor tried to bully the family business. And that's when things really started to turn. The tension broke with sharp snap. The stocky man yanked out a citation pad and started scribbling like his life depended on it. "You're being fined $5,000 for unauthorized operation of heavy machinery," he barked, hand shaking just a little too much. Owen didn't blink. He just reached down, scooped up a handful of the dusty gravel at his feet, and let it fall grain by grain through his fingers. "You know what's funny?" Owen said, his voice as calm as a breeze before a tornado. "I recognize that uniform." The taller man stiffened. "Why you do?" Mason could almost taste their panic. It hung thick in the air, bitter and clumsy. Owen stepped closer, towering over them both now, forcing them to tilt their heads back. "Yeah," he drawled, "because my brother-in-law's on the county zoning board. Real uniforms don't look like something you ordered off a discount Halloween site." The shorter guy muttered something under his breath, shifting on his feet, but Owen wasn't done. He pulled a small, leather-bound notebook from his back pocket, flipped it open, and read something aloud, slow and deliberate. McIntyre Farms. Owned and operated by Owen McIntyre, licensed under state and federal agricultural exemptions. Non-residential, non-HOA land. Protected under the Farm Preservation Act. Mason watched the blood drain from the men's faces. The taller one cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Listen, we can work something out." Owen's smile disappeared like someone flipped a switch. "You're right about one thing," he said, voice dropping low. "We're going to work something out. You're going to put down that fake citation, march your sorry backsides off my land, and pray we don't press charges. Otherwise..." He let the threat hang there, heavy and thick as the summer air. And for the first time, the enforcers looked scared. The men faltered. You could see it in the way their shoulders sagged. In a desperate glance, they shot at each other like a pair of kids caught stealing candy. Mason stayed back, arms crossed, letting Owen handle it. His son had a gift for moments like this. That quiet, searing kind of authority that didn't need yelling to make grown men reconsider their life choices. The taller guy finally broke first. He dropped the fake ticket book onto the gravel with a soft plop and took a cautious step back. "Maybe there's been a misunderstanding," he mumbled. Owen tilted his head, slow and deliberate, like a man savoring a confession. "Maybe," he said coolly. "You want to tell me who sent you out here?" The shorter one clammed up, jaw twitching, but the tall man, nerve shot, blurted it out. It was the HOA president over at Meadow Glen Estates. Mason frowned. Meadow Glen was 10 miles east. Fancy subdivision with manicured lawns, and rules about everything from mailbox height to shade of mulch. Hadn't even been built when Mason first opened the factory. "She said this land fell under new zoning." The man added quickly, "Told us to cite anything that looked non-compliant." Owen barked a humorless laugh. "Zoning changes take years. Public notices. City council votes. And you think that applies to private farmland?" His voice sharpened like a blade being drawn across a whetstone. "Or maybe you were just hoping to scare some old man into shutting down a business you couldn't touch legally." The shorter man stiffened, guilty as sin. But before they could run their mouths any further, Mason spotted movement down by the old cattle fence, a black SUV, creeping slow along the property line, watching, waiting, and somehow he just knew whoever was inside was the real problem. The black SUV rolled to a stop just past the fence line, engine idling low, windows tinted too dark to see through. Owen turned his head slightly, catching the movement too, the easy confidence in his stance sharpening into something tighter, warier. "Stay here," he muttered to Mason, already striding toward the fence. Mason's gut twisted. He didn't like it, the way the SUV just sat there, silent and smug, like whoever was inside thought they still had the upper hand. The two fake enforcers fidgeted, glancing between each other in a vehicle like lost puppies waiting for a master's command. When Owen reached the fence, The SUV door finally swung open with a soft creak. Out stepped a woman, mid-40s, slick blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, expensive sunglasses perched on her nose. She wore a blazer that probably cost more than Mason's entire monthly equipment budget, and carried herself like she owned everything the sun touched. "Mr. McIntyre," she called out smoothly, her voice carrying just enough sweetness to feel like a slap. "I think we got off on the wrong foot." Owen didn't move, didn't blink, just stared her down. The woman smiled wider, showing too many teeth. "I represent Meadow Glen Estates. We recently expanded our jurisdictional reach. New county initiatives, very exciting. And your facility here falls within our upgraded community plan. It's all about beautification and modernization. You understand." Mason saw it then, the way her gaze slid over the factory buildings, the open fields behind them. She didn't see a farm. She saw real estate, opportunity, dollars. Owen folded his arms across his chest, voice cold as a winter snap. "Lady, you're about 2 seconds from a trespassing charge, and you can take your beautification and walk it right back to whatever HOA meeting dreamed up the scam." For a heartbeat, the woman's smile faltered, just a flicker, but Mason caught it. She wasn't used to being told no, especially not out here, where she probably thought she could bulldoze through a bunch of dumb farmers without breaking a sweat. She tucked a stray hair behind her ear, composure snapping back into place. "I think you're making a mistake," she said, her voice dipping into something syrupy and sharp. "A refusal to cooperate could complicate things for you. Code inspections, property reassessments, environmental audits. We have resources you don't want to tangle with." Owen's mouth twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Lady, my family's been tangled up in worse than you before breakfast. You got 30 seconds to get off my land." Mason could see it in Owen's posture, the decision already made. They weren't going to play nice anymore. The woman glanced over her shoulder, no doubt checking that the two fake enforcers were still lingering nearby. But they weren't much use now. Both looked ready to bolt the second Owen took a step forward. The woman sighed dramatically, like a queen indulging peasants. "Very well," she said crisply. "But I assure you, you'll be hearing from our legal team." "Good." Owen shot back, reaching into his back pocket again, this time pulling out a business card. He flicked it toward her. It spun through the air and landed neatly at her feet. "Make sure they spell my name right when they file. 'Cause after the countersuit, I'm going to own whatever little slice of suburbia you crawled out of." Mason couldn't help it. He let out a low whistle. The woman stiffened, jaw clenching so tight you could see the muscles in her neck twitch. Without another word, she turned sharply on her heel, heels kicking up dust as she stormed back toward the SUV. The SUV peeled away in a spray of gravel, fishtailing slightly as it sped off down the narrow dirt road. Mason stood still, hands on his hips, watching until the dust settled back onto the earth. Owen turned and walked back toward him. The two fake enforcers already scattering like leaves in the wind, no apology, no backward glance. Good riddance. Mason let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "You sure about this, son?" he asked quietly, voice rough. Owen clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder, firm, steady. "Dad, we're not just defending a farm. We're defending everything they think they can steal just because they smell money." His voice cracked with a kind of anger Mason rarely heard. Not rage, but something deeper, something personal. They spent the rest of the day securing the property. Owen made calls, first to the county clerk's office, then to a lawyer friend who owed him a favor. They updated every deed, every boundary marker, every piece of red tape those HOA vultures might try to twist against them. Mason worked beside him, hammering fresh private property signs into the hard ground, welding an extra chain across the factory gates. Neither of them said much. They didn't have to. The quiet hum of work between them was its own language. By sundown, the place felt different. Not just safer, stronger, defended. That night, Mason sat out on the porch, a mug of black coffee cooling in his hands, staring across the fields he had spent his whole life tending. He thought about those fake cops, those smooth-talking suits, all their thin little threats. And he smiled to himself, small, proud. Let him come. This land didn't belong to them. Never would. Not while a McIntyre still drew breath. The days that followed felt like waiting out a brewing storm. You couldn't see it, but you could feel it in the air, thick and electric. Sure enough, within a week, a crisp envelope arrived by certified mail. Legal letterhead. Big city law firm. Mason handed it to Owen without opening it. Owen didn't flinch. He tore it open, skimmed it, and smirked. "Cease and desist," he said, almost amused. "Accusing us of unlawful obstruction of community initiatives." Mason shook his head, chuckling darkly. "They're dumber than they look." Owen nodded. "And desperate." They handed the letter straight to their lawyer, who barely blinked. "Baseless," he said, filing it neatly into a growing folder labeled counterclaims. Meanwhile, whispers started trickling in from around the county. Other farmers, business owners, even old neighbors, folks Mason hadn't seen in years, started calling, telling stories about similar fake enforcers showing up at other properties, about legal threats and shady pressure from Meadow Glen estates, about how a handful of people were trying to swallow the countryside, one community initiative at a time. Mason listened, heart heavy, but he wasn't surprised. Bullies never stopped with just one victim. Owen decided enough was enough. With a little help from a local journalist he knew, a farm kid turned reporter, they laid it all out. Public records, fake citations, phony enforcement teams, everything. By the next weekend, a front-page story hit the local paper. Farmers fight back, rural families targeted by HOA overreach. Mason bought 3 copies, one to read, one to frame, and one to send his brother out in Idaho. He figured he'd get a kick out of it. And when the woman from the SUV saw it, when that glossy smile of hers cracked in real time, Mason figured that'd be worth every ounce of trouble.